Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 18th of August. Today we're going to be doing a full frontline update beginning with the situation around Robotyne. So over the past few days, the Ukrainian 82nd and 46th Brigades, and they are air assault brigades, they have mostly taken over the frontline operations around the northern outskirts of Robotyne and also on the eastern flank of the village. So they have replaced the 10th Army Corps and specifically three brigades, 116th, 117th, and 118th brigades. These three brigades were really the forefront of operations around this sector for a couple of weeks, and they were working in tandem with 47th Brigade and I believe also 32nd Brigade. It was this unit over here. So they were working in tandem for a while. They were part of the main thrust, but they've been rotated out due to heavy casualties in order to recuperate. And so now we're seeing 82nd and 46th, as I said in my previous video. So whenever I talk about the operations around the sector from now on, keep in mind that these two brigades are really at the forefront of that. But they are receiving some support specifically from the 118th Mechanized Brigade. So over the past few days, this Ukrainian force has been able to enter the northern outskirts of Robotyne in this area over here. And they've been able to take over some of the northernmost houses. They're approaching a cemetery. And most of the town now, which would be around the center over here, is in a gray zone. The Russians have withdrawn to the southern part of Robotyne, and I'll visualize that over here. You can see they're in the southern part, really only a few houses and blocks in this area, while most of the village is now a gray zone. And this is due to the fact that there is extremely heavy shelling going on over here from both sides, so most of the houses are getting decimated at the moment. And we had drone footage from a couple of weeks ago showing the situation. It wasn't that bad, but since then there's been so much shelling within the village itself that it's becoming harder and harder for a defender like the Russian forces to hold on to positions in those houses, which is why they're trying to withdraw to less affected areas that are better prepared at the moment. And so what we're seeing occur in Robotyne is very similar to what we've been seeing occur with other frontline villages, where take Urozhaine or take, for instance, Staromayorsk. The Russians defended in that area for a while and repelled Ukrainian assaults, but at some points there's so much artillery duels going on that affect the village that it becomes untenable to hold defensive positions in these houses that are destroyed, and then it just becomes an open area where you can't really defend. And we're already seeing that process play out as the Russians withdraw really to the southernmost part of the village. So what's left of Robotyne is being defended by the Russian 810th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade. They are moved in from nearby to hold the line, especially around this highway over here. You can see. And also the Beaver Drone Unit. The Beaver Drone Unit, they have really recently come to the scene. I've seen them now release plenty of videos with FPV drones and Lancet drones and other UAVs hitting Ukrainian equipment. So they're mainly doing this on the eastern flank because that's where you have most of the Western and just generally Ukrainian vehicles being sent to attack, and that's going on the eastern flank. Even now, that's still occurring. So they are very involved in the defense of this region. Also, one thing I'd like to add is that yesterday there was this incident where Ukraine shot down a Ka-52 attack helicopter, and that was very near to the town of Novopokropivka. So here's the geolocation. It was actually shot down by a Manpads, which is a surface-to-air missile. So that is very interesting. So the handheld surface-to-air missile was able to shoot down the helicopter about 2 kilometers from the front line. You can see over here with the measurement. And in the attack, the pilot was able to survive, but the navigator died. So this is just one Ka-52, but I just wanted to just highlight the Russian use of helicopters in this region. And first of all, I want to say that it's unknown whether this Ka-52 was an upgraded version, because there's an upgraded version of this attack helicopter called the Ka-52M. And this is a new standard. It's a new variant of the helicopter based off of its experience in the Syrian civil war. So it's also augmented with LMURs, which are this long-range multi-purpose missile system. It's an anti-tank missile that can engage heavily with armored targets, so tanks, armored vehicles, at pretty long ranges of about 15 kilometers. So you can see over here, if we measure 15 kilometers, that can stretch out for a very long area, not all the way to Tokmak. Tokmak's about 21 kilometers away from the front line, but still, that is pretty far away, and it makes it harder for Ukrainian air defense to shoot down these helicopters when they try to launch these LMUR missiles. Also, it's very high precision, and the missile doesn't need any additional guidance after being fired, which increases the helicopter's survivability rate. So this is pretty interesting because we've seen the Russians use these attack helicopters more and more, and especially the new standard that's being implemented. I think there's about 24 of the Ka-52Ms, and this is just one example of a Ka-52 helicopter being used near the front line, but this time very close to the front line. And that's just sort of the risk that you have when you send a helicopter that close, because I assume the goal would be to then fire onto Orikhiv, because that's about 15 kilometers away from the front line, and it's a major Ukrainian defensive node. So if you're able to fire over from there with your LMUR missiles, that could achieve some significant results, not really on the front line, but closer to the rear. But either way, that's just part of the risk involved with having it so close to the front line. Now, moving on to the situation around Urozhaine, the Ukrainians are now beginning to attack to the east of the village that they just captured. They're trying to take over the open fields that are currently a gray zone, and I don't know if this is a part of their plans, but I wrote a thread on this on Twitter, so if you want to read that, I'll link it. But this would give them an opportunity to flank Novodonetsk if they could get control of these fields. But as you can see, since the last video, they were able to advance, you could say, about, 1 or 2 kilometers at most. And here's just a geolocated video of Russian artillery targeting 2 Oshkosh M-ATVs. These are MRAPs. There were 4 in the video and 2 got damaged. This just indicates that the Ukrainians are already attacking in the direction of these open fields. Additionally, the Ukrainians are attacking in the direction of Zhavitnye Bazhinaya, but nothing significant, with pretty small groups they're attacking from the 37th Marine Brigade, one of the units that was involved in capturing Urozhaine. And the 37th Marine Brigade is also preparing to create new assault groups. They have formed 4 new ones around Urozhaine and Makarivka throughout this entire Mokriali River Valley area, and they are already being trained and formed in order to launch assaults further south towards Zhavitnye Bazhinaya, for example, and Stormlinivka. There are also reports of firefights with SMARM's fire between the Ukrainian 31st Mechanized Brigade and the Ukrainian 35th Marine Brigade and the Russian forces that are situated around Pryutne and also situated to the northeast of Pryutne in these hills that are overlooking the Mokriali River Valley. This would indicate that the Ukrainians are moving in additional brigades to the area around Pryutne, but nothing significant has occurred yet in that direction. But keep an eye out for it. Now, moving on to this Russian drone strike on the Mezhova rail station, I'm going to zoom in on it. But before I do, look at the range and the distance between the target that was hit by the drone and the front line. It's about, you could say, 58 kilometers. And just remember, the drone is not being launched from the ground zero, just the contact line. It's being fired from a couple of kilometers back at very least. And so this is extremely interesting because it would indicate that the drone has very good coverage and that the Ukrainian air defense systems were not able to detect it before it hit the target. But to explain what happened, on August 16th, there was this Russian video they posted showing a drone. I'm not sure which one it was. I wasn't able to find any source that agreed on it. But it was a drone. It was able to hit the Mezhova rail station. Specifically, 3 boxcars were blown up as they were unloading ammo. And the reason why they're unloading the ammo at the rail station over here is because what they're trying to do is unload it at this point and then disperse it around the front line in smaller vehicles. Because if you were to bring it through the rest of the rail line, because the rail line runs through this yellow line over here, and unload it over here, first of all, that would be very far away from the front line, and then you'd have to transport it from each place that would already be on the front line, so it would be very dangerous to do that. Also, the entire plan for the Ukrainians is to disperse it around the front line in small vehicles in order to prevent Russian strikes on a large concentration of ammo. But unfortunately for the Ukrainians, the Russians were able to hit these 3 boxcars as they were unloading the ammo, preparing to disperse it. So in that strike, hundreds of tons of ammo were destroyed, and this will probably have some short-term logistical issues for the Ukrainians. Now, the rail yard wasn't significantly damaged by the strike because it hit the easternmost parts. So you could see it over here. This is the geolocation. And it wasn't actually directed at the tracks. It was directed at its siding because that's where the box cars were located. So any damage that there was, that the tracks did actually incur, could be repaired pretty quickly in a couple of days. And the thing that I do find to be the most interesting is that this is the first time in months that we've seen any sort of public announcement about a Russian attack on Ukrainian rail infrastructure. It's something that, who knows, maybe it was happening behind the scenes, but we never saw any sort of video published about it. And again, the lack of air defense intercepting this drone is also very interesting. So I'd keep that in mind. But moving on to the Bakhmut sector. On the Bakhmut sector, really there's just positional fighting at the moment. Any sort of offensive from the Ukrainians, for the moment at least, has died down as they try to compile more and more forces and concentrate them, especially around the Konstantinivka area. So it would be around here. This is where a lot of the Ukrainian troop concentration is occurring. And they're being sent there in order to prepare for additional attacks on Bakhmut's southern flank. But nothing has occurred just yet. The only thing that I could report on that occurred in terms of frontline changes is a Russian minor gain. They were able to take back this local field over here and reach a road that leads into Rozdolivka. They were able to advance, you could say, a couple hundred meters, and that's about it. So that's what I mean when I say positional warfare. Now, the final part of the video will discuss the situation around Kupiansk. In this area, the Russians have been able to make sizable gains for the first time in about a week. And when I mean sizable, I mean, spanning a couple hundred meters to 1 or 2 kilometers. So that's just an idea of the scale for you. So the Russians, we talked about this in one of the earlier videos, I think 2 videos ago, where the Russians were able to attack and advance about 700 meters to the east of Synkivka in the direction of a road junction. This is the road junction. It connects Synkivka to a suburb of Kupiansk called Petropavlivka, which is located over here. They were able to capture it, and in doing so, it advanced, you could say, about 1.2 kilometers. And this cuts off one of Ukraine's supply routes into Synkivka. They do have other means of supplying it. There's a road that runs from Synkivka into Kupiansk directly, and there's a bunch of like local paved routes that could be used. But either way, it is one route, and it's still important in the defense of the village as it is heavily contested, with the Ukrainians really only having a firm grasp over the town in the southern parts. Most of the settlement itself is just a gray zone at the moment where neither side has full control. But I would say the Russians don't have a foothold at all in any part of the village. They're trying to bypass it by attacking from the east, and that's what they've been able to do over the past couple of days. If you look at the distances they were able to advance, you could say at most they advanced 2 kilometers in this area, just taking over some of the local fields and advancing towards this ditch over here. You could see that the new Russian line is along this ditch over here, which was previously used by the Ukrainians as sort of a local defensive line. But now the Russians have been able to reach it, and they advance in gains that span from a couple hundred meters to about 2 kilometers. And I'll just go over in a polygon the area that they were able to take back, so you guys understand the landmass I'm referring to. So they took back this land, and if you go a bit to the east, they also took back this land over here, and by doing so advanced also a couple hundred of meters. So that's really it in terms of the front line. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.